The year is AD 460. The Eastern Roman Emperor Leo I, sometimes also known as Leo the Thracian or Leo the Great, has a big problem. The same as in the Western Roman Empire, a Germanic element has managed to climb the ladder of the military power structure to such an extent that Germanic biases and secondary motivations would come to influence Eastern Roman policies. The half-Alani, half-Gothic Magister Militum Aspar had managed to gain a lot of power and influence in the East, not only by commanding the military, but also by his influence at the imperial court of Constantinople. This Germanic subversion had already caused a lot of trouble, and so the Emperor Leo needed to counteract that Germanic power structure. His idea: to create a loyal elite bodyguard troop of 300 soldiers who would protect the emperor and listen only to his commands, completely unswayed by the Magister Militum Aspar. And so Leo had the idea to recruit these 300, not from the Spartans, as the number might suggest, but from an also very warlike people, namely the Isaurians, who since long had inhabited the mountainous area near Tarsus in southeastern Asia Minor. And these 300 elite bodyguard units would come to be known as the excubitores. The excubitors, or Latin excubitores, which could be translated as sentinels, were a natural evolution of the Scholae Palatinae, about which I talked in this video here. In the West, the last Scholae vanished during the reign of the Ostrogothic king Theoderic, while in the East, these units degenerated later into little more than parade ground formations. Emperor Leo chose the Isaurians as the tribe from which to recruit this new elite bodyguard unit, because the Isaurians had been since long a very independent and often troublesome mountain tribe of Asia Minor. Indeed, many in the empire saw them as barbarians. And what better way to counter the Germanic barbarians with other barbarians, but ones that were not influenced by Germanic politics and biases, and thus much more loyal to the emperor. And so from 460 onwards, we would see them rise to prominence, and they would protect the emperor wherever he went. And indeed, in 471, they would see their first real test of loyalty, when Leo instigated a plot to murder Aspar and his son Ardaburius. We don't know the exact details how Leo managed to do that, but the absolute loyalty of Leo's 300 Isaurians was quintessential in this undertaking. It is even said that once Aspar and Ardaburius were no more, the Germanic supporters of Aspar tried to storm the imperial palace at Constantinople, but the excubitors repelled that attack heroically. If only Anthemius, the emperor of the West, would have had a similar loyal elite unit, but alas he didn't, and so Ricimer was allowed to live, and thus the Germanic subversion is what ultimately ended the Western Roman Empire. But Leo ridding the empire of Aspar and his son Ardaburius in one fell swoop ended the Germanic power structure in the Eastern Roman Empire, and the importance of that thus cannot be overstated. As for the gear they were quite similar to the Scholae Palatinae, as one would imagine a late Roman soldier. On the famous mosaic of the San Vitale Church in Ravenna that depicts Justinian, Belisarius and Narses, we can see the excubitors on the left. They wore shields with a Chi-Rho emblem, they used the spear as a primary weapon, and certainly a Sparta type of longsword as secondary weapon. And we can see that they wore a collar made out of bent iron with a gem in its midst, so that they were unmistakably to be immediately recognized as who they were. Some were also more heavily armored, and some also used axes as battle gear.
And now to something different. You love Roman history, I love Roman history, right? That's why you're here. What if I told you that you can buy Roman history as a present for yourself or someone else? Enter the SPQR Shop. They make amazing rings, amazing pendants, attributes, terracottas, coin replicas. They make a lot of wonderful replicas of Roman items, and it's all 100% handcrafted. Let me tell you, the level of craftsmanship is absolutely incredible. You can even buy the one and only Maiorianus ring. The ghost of the Emperor Majorian himself once appeared to me in a dream and told me that the power of Majorian himself is imbued into that ring. Okay, maybe the whole story was completely made up, but the ring sure looks cool, and you can only get it on the SPQR Shop. But there are of course many other rings and amazing items that the SPQR Shop crafts with an incredible attention to detail. And with a code in the description, you will get a 20%, I repeat, a 20% price reduction on every purchase on the SPQR Shop. So don't hesitate and buy something nice for you or someone else as a present who also happens to like Roman history. Thanks for your attention, and back to the video.
The excubitors were headed by the Count of the Excubitors, the Comes Excubitorum, who was entirely independent from all other officials and subordinate only to the emperor himself. It was this closeness to the emperor which would see a new dynamic emerge, namely that it happened a few times that the Comes Excubitorum would become emperor himself. This happened, for instance, with Justin I, who was the leader of the excubitors under Anastasius. This also happened under Justin II, when Tiberius II was Comes Excubitorum, and when the emperor gradually fell into madness, he was appointed Caesar by the dying emperor and later became sole ruler of the empire. Even Maurice was Count of the Excubitors before becoming emperor, having been elevated to the leader of the palace guards by Tiberius II upon his elevation to emperor. So 3 Eastern Roman emperors in the 6th century ascended from the ranks of the excubitors, which is 50% of the total of the 6 emperors who reigned in that century. But even when the Count of the Excubitors did not manage to become emperor, he still held a lot of power and was a person of great importance. He often acted as a general in wars, or sometimes acted as some sort of police chief when, for example, there were again clashes between the different factions of charioteers in Constantinople. Or sometimes he also helped to overthrow cruel emperors, such as happened in 610. In that year, Niketas was the leader of the excubitors, and he also happened to be the cousin of Heraclius. He was instrumental in helping Heraclius to overthrow the psychopath Phocas. Or sometimes the commander of the excubitors also recruited troops or even interrogated suspected traitors, or uncovered plots against the emperor, thus acting as some sort of detective. But most importantly, the excubitors weren't only palace guards, but they would see some real fighting action. They would partake in wars when the emperor himself was present, fighting side by side with the emperor, such as happened for instance in 598 when the emperor Maurice took them to defend the Anastasian wall against the Avars. The Anastasian wall is, by the way, an interesting forgotten fortification which is quite deserving of an own video. And of course they heroically participated in the war against the Sasanian Persians, fighting with the Emperor Heraclius, penetrating deep into the heartland of the Persian Empire and thus playing an important role in helping to save the Roman Empire. If they still counted 300 by that time is hard to tell, but if yes, then we can be quite sure that this number is very symbolic, as the Greek hemisphere was most likely even at that time still heavily influenced by the epic story of the 300 and their legendary fight against the Persians at Thermopylae over 1,000 years earlier. So it is interesting to see what an important role the excubitors played in the first over 200 years after their creation in AD 460. It was only towards the end of the 600s that they too would see a similar fate as the Scholae Palatinae before them, namely that they would degenerate into little more than parade ground units. However, interestingly, this was not their end. Namely, the Emperor Constantine V would reform them, and they would now, after around AD 760, re-emerge as an elite regiment, namely as part of the so-called tagmata, and their size was increased as well, beyond the previous 300 figure. The tagmata were more mobile than the regular troops, and they were maintained on a permanent basis. They formed the core of the imperial army on campaigns, but sometimes were also used to put down provincial revolts. By that time, the administration of the Eastern Roman Empire had been reorganized into the so-called themes, and thus the armies would also reflect that, in that they would also be organized in thematic regiments. For the next over 200 years, the executors would participate in many battles and campaigns of the Eastern Roman Empire as part of the tagmata. In 773, they took part in Constantine V's campaign against the Bulgars, and during the Abbasid invasion of Asia Minor in 782. In the late 700s, they would take part in the many court intrigues and help overthrowing Constantine VI and the Empress Irene. They were also present at the disastrous Battle of Markelai in 792, where the Romans were defeated by the Bulgars. They also took part in the Pliska campaign, another campaign against the Bulgars in 811. They would continue to partake in many campaigns in the 9th and 10th centuries. They were present in the further campaigns against the Bulgars. They were present when Crete was reconquered in 961 under Nikephoros Phokas. They would continue to be seen in battles for another 100 years, until the famous disastrous Battle of Manzikert of 1071. It is quite likely that they too, as so many other parts of the Eastern Roman field army, were destroyed and then afterwards never properly reorganized in a new form. And so the last mention of the executors is from 1081, when their remnants took part in the Battle of Dyrrhachium against the Normans, and thus ended their over 600-year-long history from their creation under Leo I as an imperial bodyguard unit to being an elite regiment of the tagmata. We cannot help but to always be fascinated by the very long time spans of Roman history, where certain units or offices survived for centuries, sometimes for even more than a millennium. This is the true incredible scale of the over 2,200 years of Roman history. And please like and subscribe so that you won't miss any future videos on the fascinating topic of late Roman history. And please consider supporting this channel via Patreon or via a YouTube membership, because it is the support of our Patreons and YouTube members that make this channel possible. You would have my utmost gratitude. And I would like to thank our new Augustus member, C. McDermott. Thank you so much, C. McDermott, for supporting Maiorianus in such a generous way. Seriously, I cannot thank you enough. And I would also like to thank our two new Caesar members, Roland Leutzinger and Boreas. Thank you so much, Roland Leutzinger and Boreas, for your support. I really appreciate it very much. And of course, I would like to thank everyone who is supporting Maiorianus in any form, be it through Patreon, YouTube membership, or PayPal donations, or simply even by watching the videos. Thank you so much, friends of Roman history. And if you want to learn more about the Scholae Palatinae, you can watch this video in the upper right corner. But if you want to learn why the Eastern Roman Empire survived longer than the Western one, you can watch the other video in the lower right corner. I say thanks again to all friends of Roman history, gratias tibiago and bene valete.